I would now like to introduce Mark Floyd.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kat. Formerly was CEO at Exeter most recently, and then COO at AmeriCredit for 9 years, and most recently joined John Lewis's company, Intelligis, as chairman of the board. So I'm excited about this new adventure. So thanks to everybody for joining our webinar today. I'm really pleased with the turnout and the diversity of the attendees. So looking forward to the discussion today, and would encourage you to submit questions, raise your hand online, and we'll get to all the questions we can. So what I want to do now, you can go to the next slide, I believe, Kat. I want to introduce Stephanie Alsbrooks, the founder and CEO of Defy Solutions, and John Lewis, the founder and CEO of Intelligis, which developed the MasterQ program. And what I'll ask each one of them to do is tell you a little bit about themselves and just a brief commercial about their company. We're not going to spend the webinar talking about the company. This is to be more of an informational webinar. So Stephanie, let's start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And to reiterate what Mark said, we would love your questions. So raise your hand, or if you don't feel comfortable, make sure to type your questions into the question pane and we'll be able to see them. But to give you a little background, Defy LOS was created to solve a problem in the market that we saw. I personally spent 20 years on the lender side, and we were continually faced with the issue of finding an LOS that we could get up and running quickly, but that we could make changes ourselves. Sometimes they were pricing and program changes, and sometimes they were compliance changes. And so we brought the Defy LOS to the market to give the lenders both the flexibility of a quick system they're able to get up and running, and then the flexibility of being able to make those changes themselves, whether it's based on laws, compliance, pricing, programs, new partnerships, and so forth. So appreciate you guys letting me be here.
All right, my name is John Lewis, and I'm with Intelligis. Our software platform is called MasterQ. Like Stephanie, quite a bit of background in auto finance, where Stephanie's on the front end, we're on the back end. My wife Pearl and I, we built a couple of different companies that ended up becoming industries. I was a corporate skip tracing trainer at Chrysler and saw an opportunity to build a skip tracing company, which we did in 1988, called Skip Busters, and I think to this day they're still the largest skip company in the country. And we built a repossession management company called American Recovery Service, or ARS, in '94. And we came back to address a need where we didn't really see software platforms being able to bridge the gap between gathering all of the different pieces of information on people to be able to put it into like an automated workflow to be able to find people that were difficult and hiding, didn't want to be found. We didn't realize they were going to form the CFPB the month we launched our software, and that kind of shifted our direction for a couple of years because it meant we had to build all these different rules and automation into the system to be able to go through a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. So we're excited to get started, and take it away.
Okay. Next slide, Kat. Okay, so just very quickly, what we're going to cover today, we've spoken about already. Front-end compliance, back-end compliance, some challenges and solutions that we have seen, and sure a lot of you on the call have seen, and hopefully some discussion and Q&A. So, and then we'll wrap it up. So with that, I think we're going to go to the next slide, Kat, and Stephanie will jump into the presentation.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks again to John and Mark for inviting Defy and for inviting all of our lenders. Typically, loan origination systems don't get invited to the fund compliance talks, not because there's nothing to think about from the compliance side, but because most of the new laws that come along are related to back-end processes. So this time the LOS is getting a little love, and we wanted to make sure that our lenders were able to hear about that and to hear John speak as well. And a little background on Defy and Intelligis. While normally our two companies, you wouldn't see them partnering together, we are working together to try and find ways to think outside the box to help our lenders between the LOS and between MasterQ. So, so more on that later. But Kat, you can go to the next slide. So, because most of the LOS items have been around for a long time, just wanted to take a couple minutes to go over the usual suspects. and then we'll jump in and hit the new military lending act. So the usual suspects being usury and Reg Z, obviously. Our stance is, it would be great if usury were by state very easily defined. If we could all go to a website and see exactly what the max rate was by state. We all know there's not a clear table of max APR, so each lender is left to review the state rules, and their lawyers and compliance team to determine the max APR that they should assign up front. So regardless of who you're signed up with, no matter what LOS, no matter what company you're signed up with, you should not trust your technology partner to give you the max APRs, but you should make sure that you have a legal opinion and have the approval for the max APRs you have. So the key thing with usury, we feel like, is having a system that lets you enter your max APR based on your legal interpretation and the variables you need, whether that's model year, term, whatever it is, and ensuring that no user can approve an APR above the max for that deal. So you have to determine what that max is, but your system should never allow you to approve a deal over that max rate. If you're on a system for any reason that allows you to override a usury, certainly you're at risk. And if you're on any system that has the tables hidden or hard-coded so that you can't look at them and easily update them or put in the variables that you need to, certainly you're at risk. On the other hand, Reg Z, as we all know, is a formula and not really up for interpretation. So within your loan origination system, once the deal is approved and it comes in for funding, there's a very black and white calculation that needs to be done. And because this is such a critical component for the lender, we personally partner with Carlton Smart Calcs to do that calculation and to ensure that they send back the thumbs up or thumbs down. They're the expert in this area, so they keep up with the laws and any changes that might be made to ensure our lenders are compliant. So if you've built your own system, you have your own checks, you've written your own calculations, of course you're responsible for that, but your system should have it built in there and should be paying attention to any new laws. When we get into the new Military Lending Act, we'll be able to see how our partnership with Carlton Smart Calcs made sure that our lenders were protected there. On the second note, adverse action. We all know this has been around for a long time, and like usury, each lender likely has their own interpretation of adverse action. So you heard me say in the beginning, DeFi was created to give lenders flexibility and to allow them to make changes when they need to make them. So with adverse action, we first have the verbiage that goes on to adverse action, into the adverse action reasons and what the lender wants to use. Obviously, this is something that each lender should define. If your technology partner is giving you a list of adverse action reasons and you're not double checking them and making sure that those are okay for your company, that would be a bad thing. And then, of course, is who to send the letters to. I've been with multiple lenders over my career, and nobody has the same interpretation of this. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So Stephanie,
yes.
we both do software, right? And we have these rules that have to be put into our software.
Sure.
And I heard you say earlier you got to rely on the legal experts. Mm-hmm. We run into the same thing where it'll say, in the state of Oregon, you can only call the place of employment once a week, and once you call it, there's rules that have to be baked into that phone number, and you have rules that have to be baked into here too. How do you deal with that? Do you have customers that are looking to you to be the expert, looking to you to be the lawmaker, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, certainly. So we're going to ask that every time at the beginning of a contract, like what we're responsible for and what they are. And so we try to make our system open and configurable so that if the lender's interpretation of the law is different, they can make that change. A lot of times we'll give a baseline template or something that's our opinion, but we always leave it flexible for the lender or the compliance team at the lender to adjust if they see it differently.
Are there different, based on the size, are the smaller lenders wanting you to give the legal opinions more, and the larger ones have their own teams and they're kind of comfortable with that already and don't want you to make those rules? I
would say the larger lenders tend to ask us, to make sure that we have in the system what they need, and even though their compliance team will double check us. So the smaller ones may not have their own teams, but they're pretty comfortable going for additional advice.
So they'll rely on a lot of the tools that you've put in there already, but it's up to them to make sure that the laws that they're checking or boxes they're checking are
right. Probably just like with your system. I mean, you guys interpret it and you build it in, and you can and talk to them about it. But ultimately, the lender needs to make sure that they've signed off on what's built into the system.
Okay.
Yep. Question. So adding on to that, of course, who you're going to send your adverse action letters to. So every lender has a different opinion. We have our opinion, kind of what comes out of the box, just like you said, that adverse action letters will be sent to declines and to conditionals or counteroffers. However, we've run into lenders that want to send them on every applicant just to be safe. We've run into lenders who want to send them at 10 days to be safe instead of at 20 or 30 or whatever it is, and making sure that those things are configurable, that the lender can change and adjust to their level of comfort. We come across lenders who have very different definitions of what conditional is, and so our out-of-the-box system definition of conditional is if the amount financed or the term is lower than requested. However, one of our lenders might decide no if any variable in the request has changed, it's a conditional. Or they could say that we don't care if anything changed, it's just approval, and so while we wouldn't suggest that, it's up to the individual lender to go in and adjust it. So we certainly put in there kind of the most common practice, and then they can go and adjust it later. Same thing goes with the actual letters themselves. There are definitely adverse action template letters out there, but not every lender sends the same template. And some lenders will send a generic letter first and just say, contact me if you want additional information, and some send a very specific letter. So our system is open and configurable that even if one of our lenders gets a new interpretation a month after they go live or 6 months after they go live, it's a very quick, easy change for them. They don't have to come back to us to make the change. So that's the goal. So just like we were talking about, definitely suggest that whatever system you're using, the partner you're using, you're not looking at a significant amount of money and time to go in and make those changes as the compliance team is taking a look at them.
Yeah.
And then the final one on the usual suspects is obviously consistency of decisions. Everyone has learned over the last decade the key to showing that you're not discriminating in your decisioning process is having a system that works as an audit trail for you. To be able to show that when an application comes in, your decisioning logic is applied and transparency is used and so forth. So we all know the CFPB has become much more broad about who they might go after. So maybe smaller lenders were protected at one point for not necessarily having to show their audit trail, but now everybody, it's more critical than ever that everybody pay attention to that. And so it can be a tough mind shift for some smaller lenders as maybe they're used to walking to the dealership and kind of looking through the applications and not entering them in and so forth. But having a system that's trackable is key to that. So from a compliance standpoint, we get the question all the time that a flexible origination system, it could be scary because it puts too much power in the lender's hands. And we obviously don't think that's a fear. Ultimately, whether it puts the power in your hands or not, you're responsible as a lender. And so better to have the control and have the process in place internally to be able to make those changes. And then I think if there's no questions on the kind of going over the usual suspects, Kat, you can go to the next slide and we'll jump into the new law. So the Military Lending Act, and I'm sure everybody on the phone is familiar with it, but it impacts, of course, direct lenders and refi lenders. It's going into effect very quickly, October 3rd. And so it's our understanding that, and how it impacts our customers and the system and the LOS, that every application that comes in, at least prior to funding, the lender has to determine, is this application impacted by the Military Lending Act? The bureaus, of course, offer products that can be add-ons to the subscriber code. The good thing about our system is once you have your subscriber code in, if you add additional products on with the bureau, they'll come through to our system automatically, so there's no changes needed there. So they'll go check the database, send back yes for military, no if not. And of course, if the answer is yes, then your usury charts are kind of out the window now. The max rate that can be charged is 36, even if you're an unregulated state. And in addition, there are some mandatory disclosures that have to go out. You have to make sure that if it's a military customer, that they get their mandatory disclosures. So within our system, we have the ability to create your own notification templates and those types of disclosures. So our customers that are impacted by this, certainly we've been chatting with and talking with. Ultimately, they control the configuration and those changes, but we give them the power to do that. And the second way it impacts it would be in the verifications process. The Reg Z check or the APR calculation is going to be different for customers who are flagged yes. And like I told you guys, we use Carlton Smart Calcs to do the Reg Z check. So, so that was an update we made between our integrations where Carlton updated their formula to calculate correctly, and we passed additional fields into them. So since we were integrated with them already, our lenders got the benefit of their keeping up with the laws and paying attention to it and updating it. Let's see. I mean, I think that's the basis of it. If, of course, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to type them in. I know the majority of the information that we have is going to be on the back-end systems, and John's going to be covering that.
Are you finding that your clients, your lender clients, I heard you say this, are paying attention to the Military Lending Act, because there seems to be a growing or a groundswell in the industry about how big of a deal this potentially is. So I would encourage the lenders on the call to really pay attention, either with your internal compliance team, or assuming you use outside counsel for advice, really pay attention to this, because it may be a bigger deal than some people think.
Yeah, and so far, all of our lenders that have been impacted have been actively digging into it and making sure that we didn't start talking to anybody yesterday with only a week left to go.
Right.
So, so I think everybody's going to be good to go by October 3rd or right around there. And then we had one other question here: how can technology help lenders deal with fast-moving compliance changes without costing a fortune? I think we covered a little bit of it in my chat with John, but it's more critical than ever with not just compliance changes, but market changes and wanting to keep on top of things and roll out new programs. That the technology that you have it lets you control it and lets you make changes, and is not something where you have to pay a bunch of money and wait 6 months for something to change. And so whether that's a compliance change, whether it's pulling new third-party data that you want to test out and try, we're just in a different time now, and within the technology is available to put that power in the lender's hands and make sure that they're not 6 months behind on a compliance change.
When did you first realize that you wanted to build your own software?
So I was fortunate enough at AmeriCredit, because I was there for 10 years, to be part of a project to build an LOS from scratch, and then did that at multiple companies or using using different software tools. So I got into it.
So you'd already been through the process. You got your education by being able to go through it a few times. And
right.
Did they always do it the way you wanted to, or were there things that they didn't do that you thought, man, if I was doing this myself, I could have done it different?
No, of course not, because we went kind of guardrail to guardrail from the LOSs that you get out of the box, but you had to pay the vendor a ton to make the compliance changes, to let's own it all ourselves and spend millions upon millions of dollars trying to keep it up and going. So I got the benefit everywhere I went of seeing every different version of it, and then here at Defy we were able to take everything we learned and put it into something that hopefully helps the lender stay on top of the compliance changes and get data back and forth to different systems and different vendors quickly. So.
And compliance wasn't anywhere near as much of an issue back then when you were doing these other systems.
No, definitely not. I mean, obviously auditability and making sure that the decision history and stuff is there, but certainly the last handful of years it's gotten to be a much bigger deal. And then, go ahead.
I think one of the things that I really liked that you said was having a system that works as an audit trail. Basically, everything is tracked, right? So everything that happens in your system is tracked and can be extrapolated out for reports. And when the auditors do come in, you've got the easy ability to show them the dashboards and show them the reporting that they need to see, so they have the confidence that you invested in a system that makes it easier for them to do their job.
Yeah, from that standpoint, it definitely, from a compliance standpoint and for lenders raising money and so forth, it definitely makes a big difference to have a system that you can show your rules and show your credit policies and show your usury and your adverse action and so forth.
And for the smaller guys that are out there, I think that's, we had the benefit of being audited by some of the biggest banks in the country. And when we go through those audits, we learn every single time. And what's I think really important is that when you haven't been through those before, and while this is definitely kind of scary stuff to have somebody come in and audit you for anything, but when it's your business and what you're doing, I think the technology really is the driving force behind being able to put in place what you need to track and have a way to track it and have alerts to come back and tell you when things are not happening that were supposed to happen, so that when they come in and sit down, they're able to get what they need, get in and out as quickly as possible, so they can see that you've put together the system that really works.
Absolutely, and hopefully that transitions right into to the items that you're going to chat
Yeah, it's
about.
front end, back end, right? It's the same deal, right?
That's the front end, and now it's your turn, and a lot more meat around the items that you're going to cover.
Yeah, they definitely, with the new with these new rules, and Kat, you can probably forward a couple slides to the CFPB proposed new rules report. You know, they released a 117-page document of proposed rules, and for those who have had the pleasure to read it, it's quite a bit. There's a lot there. There's a lot of different angles. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's still room for discussion and the opportunity to provide feedback. When you look at some of the studies based around it, they really didn't get a real deep dive of the customers that they could have talked to. I think they talked to, you know, there's thousands of agencies, and they talked to a very small subset. So I think it'd be helpful to get everybody as involved as possible, because these are definitely going to have a big impact on us. And these really focus on the third party smaller. They come out and they say 75% of the debt collection agencies have a staff under 20, and that's who they say this focuses on. But I don't think we want to kid ourselves that that's exactly what it's only going to be. When they're talking about an FDCPA that hasn't been rewritten since 1977, and now they're starting to tell you how you have to really use that with today's technology and with some of the size and number of complaints they're seeing, I think they're really laying the groundwork for what is going to happen at the larger third parties as well as the first parties. That's just my opinion. But we'll go through it, and you guys can form your own opinions. And so, you know, they've in 2012 they came out with the larger participant rule that said 60% of the revenue of the 100, you know, was 175 of the largest third parties that are all doing 10 million or more out of the 6,000 debt collection companies in the country. So those guys are already on the radar. They've already been audited. They've already had visits from the CFPB. This is really geared more towards the smaller companies, debt buyers, collection agencies, law firms, loan servicing companies. And then they clearly say in the next several months we'll address first-party lenders. And there's already letters coming back from the credit union space, from the, you know, the Association for the Credit Union, saying please look at the fact that, you know, we're exempt from the FDCPA and please consider that, and so on and so forth. So I think it's going to be real interesting to see how this shakes out for everyone. But let's kind of dive in a little bit to what they're talking about. If you go to the next slide. So they really talk about 5 words that I pick out of this that come over and over again: information, verification, validation, disclosure, and communication. And if you go to the next slide, you kind of wonder, what do they want? Well, they clearly say to drastically overhaul the debt collection market by capping collector contact and ensuring companies collect the correct debt. So they're telling you what they want. They want to cap the amount of contact that you're able to make, and they want to make sure you're collecting the right amount of money. And one of the reasons why there's a lot of problems with that and a lot of disputes is because of the technology used to pass information from the first to the third parties. Is really, the systems are not in place to always give them everything they need. And I think that's important. So, you know, they talk about collecting the correct debt. They talk about, you know, being careful to not have excessive phone calls and disruptive phone calls. Don't call the guy at work if he says don't call him at work. And if he does say don't call him at work, then how does the next person working the account know that? Make the debt details clear, but make the disputing process easy. Sounds simple, and I don't know if they're going to be able to simplify it in the way that they say, but that's one of their objectives. They want to make sure that the debt has been documented clearly, and that in a lot of cases they want to send out letters in advance that clearly says exactly what do they owe, and provide a 30-day moratorium before they even start collecting the debt. And they want to be able to make sure that they're not allowing collections to continue or lawsuits to happen if the proper documentation isn't followed. And I think they want that because when they go in and do an audit, they want to know that. They want to be able to see that and be able to clearly see it, and they want to tie the first and third parties together to be able to hold them both responsible, and they seem to be starting to do that in this document. and they want to stop burying the dispute, meaning that the customer complains to the first person, I don't owe the money, and then they just outsource it to another vendor, and that guy doesn't, the vendor doesn't know that they disputed it because it's buried somewhere in some notes, and now they want to make sure that that information is passed. So if you go to the next slide, why are they doing this? Well, they're doing it because they're getting a ton of complaints. 85,000 complaints last year. They say this is the largest industry for consumer complaints, and 25% of all the complaints by the FTC are coming from this industry. And it's mostly around money people feel they don't owe, being harassed, making false and misleading statements. I mean, I think the industry's changed a lot in the 30 years I've been in it, where you don't see as many types of things being said, especially when you're trying to locate people. In the old days, there was a lot of things that happened, a lot of things said on the phone that were misleading, trying to locate the person that had skipped out on their loan. You really can't do that anymore. Now your calls are recorded. Now everybody's listening to what you're saying, and if you say the wrong thing, you'll lose your client. Threatening legal action without taking legal action. I mean, that's the oldest trick in the book, that I'm going to sue you if you don't pay, but then they never sue anybody, and you intimidate people, and that's not the right thing to do. And I think it's a good thing that they're really doing some of these things and making it, holding people accountable, if you will. Improper contact kind of falls back into false or misleading statements, but that's a pretty wide scope of what that can mean. And then disclosing debts to third parties. I mean, nobody deserves to have a bill collector tell their brother or cousin that they're past due on their payments. So I think they've tried to get a little smarter about that whole level of contact and what can be and can't be said, and the lenders are getting smarter about the requirements to have all calls recorded and monitor the calls and make sure we're listening to what the people we're hiring are saying. If you go to the next slide, who does this impact? So you look at this, there's 4,000 small collection firms, and they interviewed 58. So it's kind of hard to get a good sampling of what's going on. You get a little sample. I mean, there's some interesting things that they put in there when you read. There's a whole other study they did about this whole study. It's another 30 or 40 pages. But, you can see the size of the companies. So 2,500 companies out of 3,900 are, less than 10 people. And then you can also see the percentage of the revenue. And we'll send this deck out after the conference, so you don't need to worry about the screenshot or anything like that. We'll get you guys all this deck so you can kind of see some of these numbers. And it's all in the document. That's really easy to find. And if you go to the next slide, please. So there's some new terminology that they've introduced that I think is important, and it's confirmed consumer contact. And they define that as this contact that exists once the collector, and it could be the current collector, it could be the prior collector, has communicated with the customer about the debt, and that the consumer answered, so it wasn't a voicemail, and that they verified they were the debtor. So once that happens, then you have something called confirmed consumer contact. And there's a whole myriad of rules around it, so you really have to know it, and you really have to understand when you're making phone calls and documenting calls, does CCC exist? Because it's going to affect the rules that are going to happen. So then they talk about these caps they're looking at putting on pre and post CCC, which are not even defined terminology in this document. They're only kind of casually mentioned and saying, before you have consumer contact, confirmed consumer contact, that would be, you'd be in the pre-situation, and after you have it, you're in the post-situation. Well, I mean, as any collector that's on this webinar, or anybody's ever done collections, you're going to realize, okay, I talked to the guy, he can call me in 5 months. I've left how many messages? Am I still in the confirmed consumer contact because I talked to him one time? When does that go away? And I didn't really see, and maybe someone who has read through this saw a little more than I saw in terms of what's the definition of that, of when that goes away, because I think that's going to really affect a lot of the laws. Information is a big part of this. Passing the information from the first party to the third party is critical when it's going out for deficiencies, when it's going out for repossession, what have you. It's important to be able to pass the right information and have a system in place that does that. And now it's putting the responsibility on the third parties to substantiate that debt. So it's taking the onus, in a sense, to the first party and saying you got to give it to them, but it's also going to the third party saying you have to know that this is right, and if not, you can't work the account. And then it says if you have like a lender who's giving you collection assignments and you're finding that there's a propensity to have more and more people disputing the debt, then you have to think, well, maybe there's something wrong with their accounting system. They're sending me the wrong debts. So you really can't work the whole portfolio is the way I read this. So I think that's you know, it's a good thing to require the lenders to extrapolate the information out of their systems and get it to the third parties, and it's the way it should be. It should be accurate information: full name, last address, phone number, account number, specific information. When did they last pay? When are they next due? If you get the guy on the phone, you want to know that to have an intelligent discussion as a third party when you're discussing it with someone that was referred to you by the first party. The next one, I think, is maybe one of the biggest impacts: information sharing. Requirements and restrictions would follow the debt if it were sold or transferred. And if you change the slide to information, sorry about that, Kat, I forgot to tell you to do that. But the second part of that, information sharing, requirements and restrictions would follow the debt if it were sold or transferred. So if you move the account from vendor to vendor or you sell it, there's still requirements on the first party to be responsible, and there's still restrictions that are placed. And a lot of those restrictions have to do with passing and sharing of information. So what they're saying is they're requiring information that could cause a subsequent debt collector to fall into a regulatory problem if they don't know what the first guy did. So what they're saying, you know, let's look at the location rules under FPA. If you lose track of your customer and you're trying to reach them, and you call the guy's brother, and let's say it's an early stage bucket at the lender. You call him at day 30, and the brother says, "Don't call me again." And you put that into a note. Then it rolls to the second bucket, and they don't see the note. They're going to call the brother. And then it goes to the repossessor, or it goes to the skip tracer, and they don't see the note, or they never get the note because the information wasn't shared to them, and that information needs to be shared to them because if they call the brother, they have a violation. And the lender's responsible for what the vendor's doing. So it all becomes very complex if you're not working in systems that are fully integrated, and if we don't all support that integration, or if you're not working in one single system. And there's not really one single system out there that addresses everything from the front end to the back end. So that means we all have to figure out a way to work together, you know, as Defy and I are doing, and saying, is there a way here that we can look at the integration of our systems? Even though they're on the complete front end and we're on the complete back end, I think there's some synergies of being able to do that. Or is there a way that we can integrate with collection systems, as Defy has done? And I think that makes sense too. And then the vendor systems.
Pretty intense, because the lender could go through and make their back-end systems just rock solid with lots of data fields and not a lot of notes, you know, so you could just have all kinds of data. But ultimately, if the vendor that they're passing it to can't take it or doesn't see it or miss anything. So
yeah, and it becomes even more complex because the lender's now responsible for auditing all the vendor systems because it's got all the PII in there. So in the repossession industry, which we're very familiar with, some of the larger repossession companies, they get assignments in 13 different systems. Does that mean the bank is auditing 13 different systems? And now when you go through an audit, you have to go through code review, penetration testing. These audits are massive, and they're very expensive for the bank. So are they going to continue to just allow the data to flow out in all these different systems? It's really, really mind-boggling when you look at all this. So it's a challenge. And I hope the CFPB realizes it, because when you look at cost, if you Google $$ sign in this 117-page document, there's places where they say it'll cost $1,000. It's like pretty unrealistic. So if you go to the next slide, verification, validation, disclosure. Again, you know, the sharing process is discussed again. Got to share the debt information, got to share the consumer information. Then the specific pre and post confirmed consumer contact has to be shared, because if you have consumer contact and you send it out to another vendor, they have to know that, or they may fail based on some of the federal and state regulatory contact requirements. And then pre-collection notices for verification, validation, and disclosure, where there'd be a 30-day moratorium. So when you receive the debt, you have to verify everything is in place of what you need to be able to collect the debt. You have to monitor the portfolio to make sure that you don't have a bunch of debt that people are disputing, because then you may have a problem with this person or the company that's sending the information. And then there's a 30-day moratorium before you can do anything that gives the person the right to take the letter they get and peel off the bottom and send it back into you, so there's an actual process around disputing the debt that they're feeling needs to be made easier. Go to the next slide, communication. Prior to initiating collection activity, again, obtaining and reviewing the information, and not having this affects FDCPA rules, transferring the information from vendor to vendor, again, through communication. How does one person communicate with another? And it really, it really hits home, I think, when you really look at the magnitude of this. If you go to the next slide, calling restrictions. Regulations to govern the contact frequency and the leaving of messages, and regulations to govern the time, the place, and the manner of collection contacts. Adding numerical restrictions, and we'll show you what those look like, and being able to add caps, and now also saying that contact is not just a phone call. Contact is email, text, mail, field contact. So if the repossessor goes out to repossess a car, makes contact, then your repossession system needs to be able to document that and tell you that so that you can track it. If you go to the next slide, you can start to see what those numbers look like. So collector activity, they either do or don't have confirmed consumer contact. How many attempts can they make per address or phone number? How many total attempts can they make in a week? And how are you tracking this? And how are you tracking this if multiple people are working the account?
So it sounds like, just like with some of the stuff on the front end, some stuff is very obvious, 3, 6, whatever it is. But then the definition of what contact is, or what each lender may have a slightly different definition, or what pre is versus post is.
That's right.
Whatever.
Like in Massachusetts, they tell you that you can contact the customer twice in a week if he gave you the phone number. So you have to know the source of the phone number. But a lot of times you go to LexisNexis or a data provider and get the phone number. So now all of a sudden, you got the phone number not from the customer. So you have to have a system, that's what we built, to where you can know the source of the data and say, okay, I got this out of my Shaw collection system and I know the customer gave it to me, so it's 2. But I got it from LexisNexis, I can only call them once. How do you make sure they don't call a second time? And if you pass the account to a vendor, how do you make sure the vendor doesn't call?
Lots of different fields that need to be configured, and lots of things that the lender has to be able to.
Yeah, and how do you can't do this in checking your notes.
Right.
So then the second part is about in regards to the location contact, where they're giving you a little more flexibility. So attempts per unique address, look at it, 3, 6. They're not putting limits on the number of calls you can make to different people. So that's good. They allow you to continue to keep calling to locate the person without caps. So that helps. As you notice, it says customer has confirmed consumer contact. I guess 0 means that it's not even applicable because they have the confirmed consumer contact. But in the document, it states that they're okay with you calling the brother and the sister and the cousin as long as you don't repeatedly call them.
So you're seeing with a lot of lenders, or some lenders, that they're managing the rules with policies and procedures, not technology?
I see them to some degree trying to manage it with technology. I see them trying to manage it with Excel spreadsheets, to be honest with you.
So manually, yeah.
It's complex, and I don't know how they could be doing it without, as a matter of fact, I don't think they can be doing it accurately without it.
When there is technology to help them.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of the systems that they have some of these things in place.
Right.
Where it gets tricky is, if you're paying millions of dollars for your collection system, you can't necessarily give that collection system out to your repossession, skip tracing, deficiency collection vendors. So how do they work in the same system? That's what becomes complex. And I think, when you look at some of the feedback that we've seen online and other commentaries, Ballard Spahr is a pretty well noted firm in our industry, and they're saying this is going to dramatically alter the debt collection landscape and all aspects of the collection process. I don't think they're trying to scare people. I think they're just telling the truth. And somebody as respected as KPMG, I think they really hit the nail on the head. Banks have a window to implement stronger third-party vendor management standards. They're already doing that. The banks have gotten really good at doing that. And investments in data automation and digitization will now facilitate both the enhanced credit risk assessments and minimize regulatory compliance burdens. I think that helps if you have the right systems. And then the last thing is the most important. Strategic firms will take the opportunity to upgrade their compliance and management information systems. And I know that sounds like a total commercial for what we're doing, but we're running a software company. Both of us are running software companies, and we've seen this coming, and that's what we've been building. And I think that it's going to be challenging for everyone. So we put up a couple links. If people want to discuss specific products and things, we can do that later. So you've got websites to be able to request us and talk to us and so on and so forth. But I think that the fact is that these are some pretty significant changes they're proposing, only at the small third-party lender stage, but it gives us a lot of time, I think, to really think about where's this coming into the first-party stage and how do we be prepared for that.
So, so Kat, I would say we should open it up for questions. If there's questions and you want to raise your hand, if you don't feel comfortable giving your name and speaking, you can certainly enter them in the questions pane. And from a presentation standpoint, that's all the data that we have. So if there's any questions, we'll wait a couple minutes and let people ask questions.
I have a question I'll pose to you, Stephanie, while we're waiting. It goes back to some of your earlier comments about the lender's responsibility to make sure the changes they make, because it's configurable, your system's configurable, but they're responsible and they sometimes look to you, the LOS provider. So my question is, do you monitor the changes that lender clients make to their LOS related to compliance? Because I'm wondering if you do you then advise them when you see something that's a yellow flag or red flag?
Sure.
How do you handle those?
Yeah, so so definitely we have product managers that work with our clients, and they have people they talk to constantly. So for sure, we will let our opinion be known. We're not lawyers ourselves, right? But we've come across a number of things around adverse action letters specifically, and what's the counteroffer, what's the conditional, where the lender maybe does it one way, and we think they could do it another way and save a significant amount of money.
Tell them they should take another look at this.
Yeah, and then we'll give our opinion or say what kind of the standard is in the industry or what we've seen in the past. We've called out, obviously, for legal help and questions to a number of people that we've worked with before to help our lenders. So we don't necessarily have a trigger telling us anytime anyone changes the usury and, hey, we should look at it, kind of thing. But we work closely with the lenders, not just in implementation, but ongoing to talk through.
Good. It's helpful.
Looks like there's another question. Has the CFPB put a timeline or date to when the lenders must have systems in place to accommodate these changes? So on our side, on the front end, it's October 3rd. What about on your side, John?
These are just proposed at this point, so they haven't put a timeline yet. So I think that's good that everybody has a chance to really digest these and look at what they've got in place and what does their strategy look like going into 2017.
And there's another question. Even with all the tools and technologies, mistakes do often happen. What safeguards should a lender put in place to protect themselves? On the front end side, we tell our lenders they should definitely have internal change management process. You know, nothing should. They should only give certain people the ability to make changes in the system, and everything in our system can be controlled. You know, everyone can have access, or one person can have access, so it's all permissions based. But we definitely suggest they have a change management practice in place, especially for particular configurations and tables.
Yeah, very structured, very formal.
Very structured. Make sure they get people to sign off on it before it's put in place. Make sure they look at the before and after, even taking screenshots of it and before and after. But ultimately, yeah, regardless of what system anybody is on, configurable or not, they should be have an internal change management process.
Yeah, and change management is critical. And I think that, I mean, mistakes are going to happen, and I haven't had an auditor yet who hasn't accepted the fact that it was a mistake. It's when you make the same mistake over and over again. And I think with technology, what you can do, one of our partners built a company called CoreLogic, and he's a sharp guy and has been very successful in software. And one of the things he kind of mandated that we do when we built the software was he said, you can program software to be able to project what's supposed to happen. And when something that's supposed to happen doesn't happen, you can create alerts to be able to let the people know, the users, and if it's important enough or if it happens repeatedly, it can let the managers know, and through an audit trail system. So if you have people calling people that are not supposed to be called, the user should be reminded, but the internal auditor, the compliance people, the managers, they should also get alerts that say, here's some exceptions to what was supposed to happen. And if you have the technology in place to be able to do that, then that alerting system, I think, has been very valuable for our users, and I think that's a good thing, and a way you can overcome that problem.
Great.
That's
one other comment, and we'll contact you separately. And
that's one just come in.
Yeah, well, how can technology help lenders deal with fast-moving compliance changes without costing a fortune?
That was answered. One just popped in.
Yeah, I'm developing a multi-lender evaluation system that will bring dealers and lenders into compliance on the front end.
There you go. We'll have to invite you to the next webinar there.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely additional compliance is always helpful.
That would be good.
Uh,
That's all I see. I think that's it.
We gave you all an extra 10 minutes in your day on your calendar.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining.
Yeah, thanks for your participation.